Hello, and welcome to She Chose Joy podcast, where we discuss all things love, wellness, and joy. I'm your host, Melanie Foote-Davis, also known as the Self-Love Cultivator. Today's episode is all about releasing and your forgiveness journey. Our guest today is Siobhan Davenport. As the executive director of a foundation, Ms. Davenport oversaw the foundation's impact, investing around economic and educational opportunities to low-income families and youth. Prior to that, Ms. Davenport served as senior producer and host for On the Potomac Productions, including the acclaimed series, The New Washington. She serves as a commissioner for the Maryland Governor's Commission on Service and Volunteerism and sits on the leadership committee of the National Council of Negro Women. Ms. Davenport holds a BS in Business Administration from Boston University and a master's degree in journalism from American University. She is an award-winning author writing about her forgiveness journey that led to her personal freedom. And that's exactly what we're going to discuss today. So let's dive in. Well, good morning, Siobhan.
Good morning.
Well, welcome to She Chose Joy podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here on this rainy Wednesday morning on the East Coast.
Oh, it's raining there. Yeah, it was a tornado or something going through here, in the area last night here. So we had like this major downpour during the night. But right now, I believe it's pretty clear here in Chicago.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I am choosing joy on this rainy day.
Yeah, we could just call it liquid sunshine.
Yes, we can.
We'll consider it liquid sunshine and we'll go from there.
Yes.
It's I have been enjoying the weather here in Chicago because, it's not usually this warm. And I don't know what it is today. I'll have to check, but I know over the weekend it was in the 70s. And so to have that in November was absolutely fantastic.
Yes, absolutely. I'll take 70s any time of year.
Yeah, I told my husband that I should have negotiated and being away in the winters in our marriage contract. Because I'm really not a cold weather person. And I'm one of those that when I get cold, it's like I get cold to my bones. And so it takes me a long time to warm up.
Ah, I see.
Yeah. And Chicago's the winter here, like 30 degrees here does not feel like 30 degrees at home in Maryland.
Ah, okay. Because of the wind.
Yeah, it feels different. Yeah. It's one of those things where you see the news and they're saying that the temperature is, 26 degrees, but it feels like 11. It's like, well, why don't we just say it's 11 degrees?
Let's call it
right. If that's what it feels like, then that's what it is. That's what my body says it is.
Well, now I'm the opposite. So I am going through some changes. So the cold weather feels so good to me.
Oh, you mean those personal summers that you get?
Yes, exactly.
So I've been getting those too, which have been real interesting. And they come at the most inconvenient time, like when I'm trying to sleep.
Right.
Yeah, that's a journey. We could actually do a whole podcast segment just about those personal summers.
Because you sure could.
It's amazing. And my husband's like, wow, your body literally is moist. I said, yes, because I literally am hot. like this is really happening here.
Exactly. I am on fire right now.
Yes, and yes. Yeah. So on those moments, yes, I appreciate the cold. But other than that, no, give me 70 and 80-degree weather all year, and I will be, totally at peace with that. Hmm.
That sounds great.
Hmm. Although I do love making snow angels.
Oh, yes,
Hmm.
absolutely. Takes you back to childhood for sure.
Hmm. Hmm. So thank you so much for saying yes to coming on the show and hanging out with me for a moment.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, this is just an incredible opportunity. So I thank you for the invitation.
So the topic we're going to talk about today is really centered around, being on a forgiveness journey. And that's something that it's an opportunity for all of us, but it's also something that many of us resist or avoid, right?
Absolutely. That's true.
Yeah, I think I grew up hearing things like forgive and forget,
Hmm.
but that's
Yeah,
unrealistic and it doesn't serve us to forget it.
absolutely not. I'm in
Yeah.
agreement with you. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so let's dive in. You were able to um well, you know what? I'll let you share it. You went on a really challenging, intriguing, interesting, and freedom journey, right?
Yes.
As it relates to forgiveness. Um, so so will you share how you got to a place, or just share a little bit about it, and then how you got to a place where you decided to forgive?
Oh, certainly. I'm very happy to share about my forgiveness journey. And what I will say, when you talked about forgive and forget, those sayings that we grew up with,
Mm-hmm.
we really don't grow up with a sense of what forgiveness is. And
Mm.
particularly if you're raised in a religious household, there's almost a guilt associated with forgiveness because you might still be angry over the grievance, but
Mm-hmm.
yet your religious, and in my case it was a Christianity upbringing, calls for you to immediately forgive.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do with those emotions, right? You suppress them. It turns into guilt. It's self-directed towards yourself, anger at yourself, that what is it about me that
Mm-hmm.
I'm having difficulty forgiving. What I will share is that my forgiveness journey started very interestingly because I didn't realize I needed to forgive. And when I share with you what happened, I think on the outside looking in, you'd probably like, oh no, you needed to forgive. So where was the
Mm-hmm.
disconnect? But so I was actually raised by my paternal grandmother, and both of my parents were teenagers and extremely immature. And in both of their cases, they both had emotional issues that went unaddressed all their lives, that led to substance abuse issues as well. So they were not in a position to become parents. And,
Mm-hmm.
I'm very grateful that they recognized that. So my paternal grandmother stepped up and brought me home and raised me as her child, although I knew everybody's relationship in my life. So
Mm-hmm.
my mother actually passed away. She was killed in a car accident when I was 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And although, I mean, I knew her, I had had the opportunity to spend time with her. We lived in different states. So I was in North Carolina with my grandmother, And although my parents were no longer together, they were in Washington, D.C. So she would send me cards and letters, and I had the opportunity to spend a summer with her before she passed. So I had a love for her, but it was more like maybe an older sister or an auntie. My grandmother was that maternal bond that a child has with
Mm-hmm.
their mother. So I certainly loved my mother. I loved my father. And so my father was in and out of my life. And because my paternal grandmother was raising me, I had a front row seat to their dysfunctional relationship. And what I mean by that is that my father would inevitably get himself into some kind of trouble where my grandmother would come to the rescue.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to resent that because, you're looking at an adult man, and, I'm looking at my friends who have fathers that are in the home, they're engaging with their children. Those things that you imagine a father would do. They're taking them, to dance recitals and ball games and eating family dinners together and tucking their children into bed. And so I started to look at my own life and think, well, what's wrong that my father isn't here? And then that turned
Mm-hmm.
into, well, what's wrong with me that my
Mm-hmm.
father isn't here? So over the years, I really did start to resent him. And in one point, my grandmother said to me, and I believe I was either just about ready to graduate from high school or I was in college. And she said, you're going to have to take care of your father. And I gave her pushback, and I'm raised in, North Carolina, the South, lots of manners, respecting of elders.
Mm-hmm.
And, everything in me said, no, I'm not going to take on this responsibility. And she was shocked. And so I told her, I said, he's not my son, he's your son. If anything, he should be a father to me. And so she backed down, and we never had that conversation again. So fast forward, my grandmother ended up having Alzheimer's, and I had to relocate her from North Carolina. At that point, I had moved to Maryland, and I was married. My father was still in and out of her house, and he knew what her situation was. So I had to call him and talk to him and say, listen, it's gotten to the point where she needs consistent care because she can't be by herself safely at home.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to relocate her. So he said, oh, okay. So then he ends up moving out. Like, he doesn't tell me he's moving, doesn't tell. I mean, he may have told her, but of course, her memory wasn't the greatest. Doesn't say where he's going. And she had about a month or so really by herself until we were able to relocate her. So I was, so that added more fuel to the fire, so to speak, with
Mm-hmm.
him. And so, anyway, we relocated her into a long-term care facility that focused on memory loss, and so she was with us for almost 2 years, and so she began to decline in her health, and so we had to call in hospice, and so I called him to let him know that essentially she is dying, and that we had burial plots for our family in North Carolina. So I was just kind of preparing him
Mm-hmm.
that this was happening, and that eventually she would be buried in North Carolina with her parents and grandmother and older brother. So his first question to me was, well, what are you going to do with her house? And at that time, my cousin had moved into my grandmother's house. So,
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't sold it or anything like that. So it kind of threw me off when he asked the question. I said, well, what do you mean? House
Mm-hmm.
die? Like, what are you going with this? So he said, well, I'm wondering if you're going to sell it so I could really use my share out of the house. And something in me in that moment just shut down. And I can't even explain it. I can't tell you how the conversation ended. I don't think I really said anything to him. I think I may have just hung up. And
Mm-hmm.
I went back into the room to be with my grandmother, who did subsequently pass. So I did not talk to my father for 13 years. I think at that moment I
Mm-hmm.
said, I'm done. Right. And I
Mm-hmm.
didn't think about him. I didn't, it was just like he was a ghost who had just completely disappeared from my life. And I ended up at that having children. And there's something about the innocence of a child that will keep prodding you, right? So when the kids
Mm-hmm.
were old enough, they would ask, Mommy, where are your parents? And so I'd say, oh, well, my mother is in heaven, and my father, at that time I found out he lived in Florida, but I didn't have an address or anything like that. And I said, oh, my father lives in Florida. So they said, well, we want to meet him. And and my heart dropped. And so I began to say things, like at first I was like, well, no, we can't really see him. And then they wanted more explanation. So I
Mm-hmm.
just said, listen, you have a great dad who's here for you. Look what daddy does. He takes you to the park, he buys you treats. I said, my father wasn't like that. He was not a part of my life. So he's not someone that I would want to introduce you to because his friends are not good people. So over the years, they would eventually, they would ask about him. Even my husband would say to me, "Hey, do you want to reach out?" My uncle, who was my father's older brother, had tracked him down and had an address and a phone number, and
Mm-hmm.
said to me, "Do you want to call him?" And I'd say no. We actually went to Orlando and took the kids to Disney for spring break, and this was in 2014. And so I knew that my father was in Tampa. So Corey said to me, "Hey, we're down here. Do you want to give him a call? Maybe we could take a day and drive to Tampa." And I was like, "No, I'm good." I would always say,
Mm-hmm.
"No, I'm good. No, I'm good."
Mm-hmm.
So, interestingly, I have to bring my faith into this because it always amazes me how God works.
Right.
So I used to love uh, fictional writing and creative writing. And so I had said, I really want to take a class because I felt like I needed to do something for me. And so I had just started this creative writing class and I was enjoying it immensely. It was about probably about 15 of us, very diverse group in ages, race, half men, half women. And part of our charge was to submit. You were chosen to submit some of your creative work, and we would read it and critique and provide critique for the next class. So I was so busy enjoying doing that and the readings that our instructor was assigning to us, I never wrote anything. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm looking and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I only have like 3 more weeks to write something. And I had an idea of what I wanted to write. And I was like, I can get it done. This is, it's just in
Mm-hmm.
my head. I just need to get it down. So anyway, so this is happening. I'm down in Orlando, um, taking a break from the class. My husband's asking me if I wanted to reach out to call or visit my father. I tell him no, I'm fine. And when we return home, about a week or so later, I get a Facebook message. And it was one of my father's friends. And I'm immediately suspect because, his friends, like I said, were people that were like him, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they're, substance abusers and that kind of thing. So I get this message from his friend and it's, just please call me. And, I tell my husband, oh my goodness, I really don't want to make this call, but I'll just go ahead and do it. So I call. And it turns out that my father had passed a few weeks prior to his friend reaching out. It took him a while to find me. And so it wasn't lost on me that had I um, called or visited him when we were in Florida, I would have
Mhm.
been able to see him before he passed. And in the news of his passing really hit me hard. I didn't think it would because like I said, I never really thought about him. I didn't think I was angry. I just thought that it was time to sever a relationship that really was not a healthy one. And so I was crying when I found out he
Mhm.
died. It was, um, it was shocked me that I even had any emotion where he was concerned. And so this friend said, I hadn't been in touch with him in a while, but I'm going to, give you the number of the friend that of his best friend. And so I ended up calling his best friend, who shared with me that my father actually died from kidney cancer, and that it was pretty quick. He had gotten the diagnosis, and about 6 months later had passed. And his friend shared that was over at his house. They were watching. My father loved sports, and they were watching a basketball game. And he left him and said, "Well, I'm going to come by in the morning to check on you." And when he came
Mhm.
by, my father had passed in the night. So that also touched me, that he died alone as well.
Mhm.
And so I just, at that time, I said, you know what? I never stopped loving him. I just thought I had stopped loving him. And I thought, because I could finally admit I loved him, I thought that was forgiveness. And
Mm.
so, I still, so I thought, okay, great. This, I'm at peace with my father's passing. I'm at peace with a relationship we never really had. And life is fine. And I'm going to go forward with it. Well,
Mhm.
what was interesting is that I ended up in my class. Remember, I was taking the creative writing class. I
Right.
had not written anything. So I ended up writing about my relationship with my father. And I told my classmates that this was fictional, that, it was just something that I had on my heart to write, right? And because I wasn't ready to share that it was really me. And
Mhm.
so I got in a reaction because, I never talked about my father, I never talked about our relationship. And so to get a reaction that people really wanted this short story to turn into a book. And they said, we want to know more about this relationship. And, one guy who was from Spain said, I'm thinking we have nothing in common. We're different age groups. He was single. I'm married with kids. And
Mhm.
he just said, I love this story. I want more of it. And
Mhm.
so it inspired me to write our story. And so I kept trying to write it, and I couldn't. And I would cry, I would get writer's block. I mean, it was just this whole process that I took another writing class. I shared that I wanted to write this story, and I never wrote about it. And my instructor said, "Are you sure you're ready to write this story?"
Mhm.
And I thought, well, yes, I forgave my father. So that made me think perhaps I really didn't forgive him. I just thought I did. So a
Mhm.
friend of mine was had taken this amazing self-discovery course that was a weekend long course, and so she had suggested that I do it, and said, you know what, you might discover something because you've been trying to write this story and it's been really difficult for you to do it, so you might discover something in this weekend long event. Just keep your mind open. So the
Mhm.
first day, people are having all kinds of breakthroughs. I mean, there's got to be about, I think it was 150 people in one room. So people are having all these breakthroughs, and I'm happy for them, but I'm like, nothing on my end.
Mhm.
And so the second day, the instructor asked us a question, and she said, "Who are you most angry with right now?" And, my initial reaction was no one. And then I thought about it and I said, well, no, I remembered my friend saying, stay open-minded. So really explore and try to figure this thing out. So, so I'm going through everyone that's closest to me. So I'm like, well, I'm not angry with my husband, I'm not angry with my kids. And I'm going through,
Mm-hmm.
relatives, friends. I'm back in elementary school, well, I never really liked her, but I don't think I'm that angry with her. I'll see you years later. And
Mm-hmm.
so, just as you and I are speaking, a voice said very clearly, your father. And I said, no. and it's interesting because I didn't even think it was weird to hear the voice so
Mm-hmm.
clearly. Just
Mm-hmm.
immediately, I said, no, it's not him. I forgave him. And so I just kept trying to run through the Rolodex. And the voice said again, it's your father. And that was when I realized it was right. I was so angry with him. I was
Mm-hmm.
so angry with myself. And I could feel that little girl inside of me that never thought she was good enough because her father was not involved in her life. And so we were going on break because they had an assignment for you to do. But obviously, with the person I was most angry having passed, I didn't know what to do. So I went up to the instructor and explained my situation to her. And she said, well, I want you to write a letter. And then I want you to read this letter out loud. And she says, there's something cathartic about writing the words and then speaking them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote this long letter and I spoke it out loud. And it was just a freedom I had never felt in my life, that I was finally able to be honest, because I was always taught to be nice. I was always
Mm-hmm.
described as a nice girl. We don't get angry. We don't, we'd rather not hurt your feelings, so we're not going to tell you exactly what we're thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to have the freedom to really acknowledge how I felt and to be able to say it was an incredible journey for me. That's
Mm-hmm.
when I realized that I finally forgave my father, because in that letter, I certainly held him accountable. I didn't forget what he did and what he did and what he did not do. I remember my grandmother having to tell him it was my birthday and that he should give me a gift. And he gave pushback on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So um so it was so forgiveness is not forgetting, because that's not healthy, and you also don't want to repeat mistakes, right? But it's
Mm-hmm.
also it's remembering, which I can share now, but there's no emotional attachment to
Mm-hmm.
what I am sharing. Forgiveness is holding people accountable. And sometimes you're fortunate enough to have the person in front of you, and I've shared my forgiveness journey. So I've had other people one young man tell me he reunited with his father after not talking to him for 3 years because of my story, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and I love that. I love the possibility
Yes.
that people can reunite. But I also recognize that there are people out there like me who literally are fighting with ghosts, and
Mm.
they need that reconciliation. They need to hold, in my case, hold my father accountable, but then release him. And part of the release is having empathy towards the other person's situation. So I know that my father had, as I shared, a lot of emotional issues that had not been treated. Um, and he had gone to different psychologists, And my grandmother wasn't ready to deal with them because one of the psychologists told
Mm-hmm.
her his problems were caused by her. So she was like, okay, we're done with this. He
Mm.
won't be,
Right.
he won't be back. And she was from the generation that you just suck it up and deal with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And you don't air your dirty laundry.
exactly. You don't.
Yeah. What happens in this home stays in this home.
Exactly. Exactly. So she
Mm-hmm.
was from that generation. And so he never had an opportunity to really work through those issues that he needed to work through. And as a matter of fact, I recognize that he was not capable of being, that sitcom television father who solves your problem in 22 minutes at the end of the
Mm-hmm.
show. That was not him, and it could not be him. So I had to
Mm-hmm.
learn to accept him as he
Mm-hmm.
was and love him in spite of his shortcomings as well.
Yeah, that's a lot to
Yeah.
unpack. So thank you so much for sharing. I knew that your story is going to help to free someone. Um, when I invited you on the show and hearing it again, hearing it again is definitely yeah, I feel really affirmed with that that belief that 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 what you just shared, because that was a lot to unpack.
Yes, it is.
It really was. And and so let's just talk this through for a minute. So thank you for sharing it. First, let me just be silly for a moment. And how did you, when you resisted your grandmother, how did you avoid not getting yourself slapped from here to next Sunday?
That is a great question.
Anybody that's listening that grew up knowing that you do not talk back to your elders know exactly what I'm talking about, from getting slapped from here to next Sunday, or
Yes.
getting the teeth knocked out of your mouth, or all of those different things we see.
Yes. Yes, that is, I look back on that moment and I'm like, it was a God moment. God's like, let me
oh,
protect
oh,
this child.
that's when you knew for sure God was real, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And my grandmother, now here's what's interesting. She didn't believe in spanking. She believed in talking to you. And
Oh,
she would talk for like a week or two at a time.
oh, that was my mom. Those tongue lashes were worse. I was like, can you just hit me already? Like, just hit
One day
me.
I asked her, I'm like, can I just get the spanky and get it over with?
Oh boy, yeah, because those and another thing moments, So it's a couple of things you share, and I know we won't get through all of it with the time frame that we're working with, but um so when you mentioned being raised, like the whole piece about being raised by someone who actually, when you're thinking about Christianity and your religious and spiritual beliefs, and um how you can feel like shameful or guilty, if you will, if you're not forgiving the person who has, caused the transgression or what have you. And that's very real for a lot of people. And I'm from that school of, I believe that I believe our belief systems, although in some ways have served us, there are some parts of those same beliefs that actually place us at risk or in harm's way. And that's one of those moments where I believe our spiritual beliefs can actually stand in the way of our own freedom and own ability to be able to reconcile what's happening within us versus what we're told, like what our real experience is and how we feel about it versus how we're taught, what we're taught to believe about our own experience.
Yes, absolutely. And I agree with you, because that certainly was the case for me. That
Mm-hmm.
because I never understood how to forgive, right? We're just told to
Mm-hmm.
forgive. Um
Mm-hmm.
that it certainly did impede my freedom. I mean, it was to the point where I couldn't even admit that I was angry and that I was
Right.
holding a grievance, because that just felt so wrong to even admit that. So it was just easier to suppress those emotions
Mm-hmm.
and just forget that I even had them. Um,
Yeah, because you mentioned that, like, we grow up without a sense of what forgiveness really is. And so when you're that nice girl, we're sugar and spice and everything nice, it doesn't give us permission to feel angry.
absolutely.
And so, and I noticed you use the word wrong. And that's the other thing that comes with the way we are taught to believe in a higher power, is that everything is this right and wrong. So we have judgment of each other and of ourselves.
Yes, absolutely we do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
For even having a feeling.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? We didn't get permission to say that we were angry and to be angry. So is that, like, I don't want to project what my own experience is as it relates to that, like permission to feel angry, but is that kind of how what you were experiencing as well, or is that relatable to you?
Absolutely. It's completely relatable. And I think we forget that one of the most powerful scenes in the Bible, if for those of us who were raised Christian, is that when Jesus came back and walked into the temple and saw that they were using it for gambling and selling goods, etc. Remember, he turned those tables over.
He flipped those
Yes,
tables.
he did.
He lost it.
Yes, he did.
Ah.
And
He said, "Y'all gonna make me lose my mind up in
up
here."
in here. Yes, yes, yes. So, and we kind of, you know, the way I was taught that story was, okay, he was justified in his anger, but we sort of skirted over it too, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
if we remember, he did come back in human form, and as human beings, we do feel angry. And there are times when we're completely justified. There are times when we may not be justified, but it's what we do with that anger. Anger itself is not wrong. And so, and I was
Absolutely.
never taught that. I was just taught even
Mm-hmm.
feeling angry is
Mm-hmm.
wrong. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that we definitely have to teach our children that you have to be in touch with your feelings and emotions, and you have to acknowledge what you're feeling, but it's what you do with that, right? That that can be
Absolutely.
destructive, but being angry is not wrong at all.
No, no, because typically if we're angry, that means an injustice has been
Yes,
done. And there are movements that are started because there was an injustice that caused anger, and we created a movement to shift things around because of it. And so I am from, like, I believe all emotions have a purpose, and all emotions deserve to be honored and respected and given room to breathe,
yes,
including anger. And then, but here's the other thing too, like Jesus, like we see him as male,
right.
right? And so again, as a woman, back to that sugar and spice and everything nice, anger still. So that even with that example, it still leaves us out of the equation.
Absolutely. It truly does. And I think as women, and the responsibilities that we have within our own families, within our community, etc. It is just so
Mhm.
important to be able to, as you said, honor each and every emotion, feeling that
Mhm.
you have, and know that you're still the same person. It doesn't
Mhm.
impact whether or not you are generous with your time or generous with your
Mhm.
talent or your money. None of that is impacted at all, but we have to honor
Yeah.
those emotions. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Like my anger, me not accepting that I was angry about what happened to my mom, which, I'll have to share in another thing. We don't have time for it. Actually is what led to my depression because
Mhm.
I had suppressed that anger for so long.
Wow.
And I would flip it to the fact that she was still alive. She was involved in a tragic accident and was not expected to survive. And so I just focused on, well, I'm blessed to still have her, all of these different things. But at the end of the day, I was literally angry, and it took me more than 5 years. It took me, wow. Yeah, it took me more than that. It took me quite a while. It took me 5 years to grieve my dad's passing.
Mm.
And then that was added on to the anger for my mom that led to a depression. So suppressing my grief and suppressing my anger, it did not serve me. So I have very strong feelings about that, as you can tell.
Right.
Um, but anyway, like all of those things, like I remember when we had our pre-call and you were talking about it being difficult to even reconcile like your public persona with your private thoughts and feelings, and that felt very real when you said that to me. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Certainly. I say that I was probably the happiest, angriest person anyone had ever met during that time period. The reason I say
Mm.
that is that my public persona was one of, just calm, easygoing, pleasant, polite, and privately I was seething. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so, anger self-directed is depression, right? So I did suffer
Mm-hmm.
from depression. I didn't outwardly, I didn't have a release valve for how I was feeling. And I knew that if I did, I won't say I knew, I thought that if people could really see what I was suffering, I wouldn't be accepted, because
Mm-hmm.
that was not the image that others had of me. So when I wrote about this story and I talk about that time period, I have friends that will say to me, wow, I had no idea you were going through that. I mean, your
Mm-hmm.
kids were growing and healthy, and you were doing well in your career, and you and your husband, were doing well, so I had no idea what you were going through. So I try to be very sensitive to others, especially if someone is this, you're a stranger, and someone is short with you. Now, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
about to be abused, don't get me wrong, but
Mm-hmm.
I do try to take a step back and not take it personally, and think, you know what, I don't know what it took for this person to get up, get dressed, and get out of their house today.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it's helped me with an empathy and looking at people for with a much more sensitive lens than I had previously, because I was so busy
Mm-hmm.
protecting my own image. I didn't have time to think about yours.
Right, right, right. Yeah. The other thing that I thought was really important to speak to is that, you going from what's wrong that my father isn't here to what's wrong with me that my father isn't here.
Yes. And, and you see this so much with children of divorce, right? And children are so vulnerable. They're completely dependent on the adults in their lives, but yet they also have this superhero persona where
Mm-hmm.
Everything that they do impacts the world. And so
Mm-hmm.
it yes, that was something that I carried. And and that's
Mm-hmm.
good for children because it helps protect them as they're growing up, but as they mature, they realize I'm a human being. I'm not I'm not all
Mm-hmm.
powerful and everything I do doesn't impact the entire world. Well, I
Mm-hmm.
never let that go. So for me, it was there's something wrong with me. If
Mm-hmm.
somebody like if you're having a disagreement with a friend, then it wasn't that I was disagreeing with the friend, it was the friend was rejecting me.
Mm-hmm.
um
Mm-hmm. Which can lead to that I'm not good
ex-
enough to be, I'm not enough. All of those different pieces
absolutely,
become our new mistaken belief that we live by.
absolutely, yeah.
So, so how were you able to make that connection and then be able to stand in the specs to that place of knowing that there is nothing wrong with you and that you are absolutely beautiful and wonderfully made and that you are good enough.
Oh, thank you. Yes. And, you know, let me just be really clear. I believe in prayer. I believe
Mm-hmm.
in educating yourself on wellness and self-help techniques. I also believe in counseling.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did have to have counseling in order to completely heal. It was one thing to forgive my father, it was the other to forgive myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did go through a period of counseling where I had to relearn that my father's absence was not a reflection on my worth.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was extremely helpful. And then the other piece of that, and I'm throwing out my faith, and I know not everybody not everyone believes in Christianity, etc. But for me, I finally found peace when I accepted the fact that my heavenly Father was more than enough. And I'm happy that I chose well with my husband, and he's a wonderful father to my children. So my children know what it's like to have an
Mm-hmm.
earthly father that loves you unconditionally. I don't exactly know what that's like, but I take peace that my heavenly Father loves me unconditionally and he made me in his perfect image. So that it's been a journey really to accept that part of myself and, like you said, rewrite the definition of how you even define yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely I can see why there had to be some unlearning and relearning and all kinds and like really opening up the mind and the heart to be able to see things differently and to be able to stand in it and reclaim your story in a way that gives you the freedom and the peace to be able to move on. Um, I usually have a quote, and so the one I pulled for today was um, it says you can only lose what you cling to, which is Buddha, and the reference, the way the person shares this says that the more you cling to the stories of the past, the more of your present moment you lose,
Ah, I love that.
and that when you release your attachment, you let life be,
Mm,
and and so you being able to no longer cling to that story of your past, face it, which is a powerful story that you shared. Um, but you actually have access to more of your present by going through that journey. And I think it's really um, it was really incredibly beautiful in terms of the way God lined up things for you, from the writing class to the weekend of self discovery to all those things to get you to this place.
absolutely. Absolutely. I do
Yeah.
marvel at that, that
Mhm.
everything was
Mhm.
perfectly aligned to get
Mhm.
me here
Mhm.
to be
Mhm.
on She Chose Joy podcast.
Mm. Oh, but thank you. Thank you. Yeah, because this episode is gonna bless somebody's soul for real. It really is. I know that. I'm saying that with like pure power and conviction because I believe it that strongly. Um, your story in and of itself is powerful. The way you tell it is so moving and soul stirring that I believe it actually could be a film.
Oh my goodness. Thank you.
Yeah. Even if it's, inspired, it doesn't have to be like every
Right.
detail be true, but just inspired, an inspiration for a story to be told because there's so many wisdom nuggets in here. And in those wisdom nuggets, there's so much freedom.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And that is what I hope that others can get out of my story. Um,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately the freedom, because um, I remember one of our ministers preached a sermon about revenge, and you can substitute revenge for unforgiveness. And he said that it's
Mm-hmm.
picking up a hot stone to throw at someone, but you're burning yourself. And so
Mm-hmm.
forgive unforgiveness, it keeps you anchored, like you said, to the past. It keeps you anchored to hurt and guilt and shame and any of those negative emotions. And once you
Mm-hmm.
can forgive, it really does give you a sense of freedom that you didn't even understand you needed. So that's why
Mm-hmm.
I do love sharing the story, because I would want someone to come out of bondage, because I was in
Mm-hmm.
bondage, and I would
Yeah.
like someone else to free themselves as well.
Well, you just freed someone. I know that. And and it was one of the things that where is it? Hold on. I was taking notes, of course, I'm a note taker. Um when you talked about holding the person, forgiveness is holding the person accountable, but then being able to release it by having empathy for the other person's situations. And sometimes that's the piece that's often left out, is that other person had their own story. They had their own set of
Yeah,
circumstances that they experienced long before we got here. And when it's a parent, and I know it's easier for me to say it than it is to be in the experience of it, but when it's a parent, it can make it even more challenging because we see them as a parent and we hold them accountable for being that parental figure. Um, but we often forget that they were humans first with their own set of circumstances and experiences long before they became our parents. And that it doesn't make it
right.
okay, for what we experienced. So it doesn't mean that makes whatever happened okay, but it definitely gives a different lens to see the experience through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that thank you
Yeah.
for emphasizing that it does not make it okay.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And people need to
Yeah.
understand that as well, that, forgiveness
Yeah.
doesn't mean that what you
Mm-mm.
did was okay with me, because it's not.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm-mm.
but like
No.
you said, it gives you another aspect in which to understand
Mm-hmm.
how this person treated you, or the grievance that you have against that person. It just helps you to be able to process it better.
Yeah. Yeah. Because me having empathy for you does not give you a pass.
Exactly.
Like, no. Like, no, no,
No,
no, no, ma'am, no, sir, not
that's
today.
right.
No.
Absolutely.
It's like, no, you're still accountable. You're still held
Yes, you
accountable.
are.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Um, Wow, it was so many things. I know I'm missing some. But again, I'm also trying to honor time. But I feel like those were really huge takeaways, even for me listening to it, was about the accountability, the releasing, the empathy, the going the path that you were led to get you to where you are. And you going with it, even though you didn't know that's where you were. That's the beautiful thing about life. It's like when we are called or led to do something, we really don't. We think we're going for one thing and we get something so much like something far better on the other side that can be really delicious, but we don't know it going in. And if we knew it going in, we
That's
wouldn't go.
right. Absolutely. If I had known
Mhm.
what that weekend of self-discovery would entail, I
Mhm.
wouldn't have participated. Because I would
Yeah.
immediately said, that's not for me. I've
Mhm.
forgiven everyone in my life.
Mhm. Yeah, not me. No, I'm not angry at anyone. No, not me. I couldn't possibly be angry. No, life is good.
Exactly.
And then I'm going to screw this up because I didn't write it fast enough. That other piece, when you said you were probably the happiest, angriest person you've ever
Yes.
met.
Yes. Yes.
Whoo, that was a nugget right there. And so I'm just going to throw this out there to our listeners. At at what point have you been the happiest, angriest person? Because I know Siobhan is not alone because I can relate to that,
Right.
right? That being optimistic, looking for the bright side, like that thing when positivity can be toxic
Oh, I love that.
because we're not necessarily, when we're overly optimistic and
Yes.
overly positive, um, it can actually be in our
Right.
way. And so being able to find the harmony between the two, which is what's really true,
Right. Right.
you know. Yeah. And so I'm throwing this out there to you. When have you been the happiest angriest person? Or um and who are you angry with right now? And is the person you angry with you? And what steps are you willing to take to get yourself to the other side of that freedom? And to be transparent, I went through that whole series just yesterday where I was angry with someone who called me. And then at the end of the call, I realized the person that I was most upset with was me. And it gave me a chance to pause and really go through my own process with some self reflecting and some forgiveness on my own.
Right.
And so a phone call where I was angry with someone else, I went down a whole rabbit hole of shame, guilt, and unforgiveness and had to walk myself through that just yesterday. And so I share that to just let you know, whoever it is that's listening, that you're not alone and that you too can get to this other side of freedom like Siobhan.
Yes.
Like, I love what I appreciate. And here's how I know that you've done
Yes.
your work through your counseling and your like all of the work that you've done is because when you do share the story, you share it from a place of power and you share it from a place of wisdom. I didn't hear you standing in as the victim. And that was an indicator for me that you've done your work. And so I applaud you and I celebrate you for daring to be courageous enough to seek counseling, for daring to not only write your story, but to share it.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that because the work is hard, but it's always
Mm-hmm.
worthwhile. And I think
Mm-hmm.
what you just stated is so important that for anyone who is going through unforgiveness, you are not alone. You
Mm-hmm.
um you don't have to feel ashamed or embarrassed, um because these are emotions that are coming up for you, but there is joy on the other side. And to
Mm-hmm.
know that, I, like you just stated, this, you had an incident yesterday. I continuously have incidents that, I just
Mm-hmm.
say that forgiving my father was the hardest part of learning about forgiveness. But once I've done that, I can do the work in other situations too. And yeah, and I
Yeah.
didn't realize I was a person who did hold on to grievances. I didn't talk about it. I didn't even think I realized that I held on to grievances, but I did. And now I understand that I can do the work and release it.
Yes. Yes, do the work and release,
Right.
not or.
Exactly.
That's a part of the work. That's
It
a part of the
is.
work.
It is.
And here I'm going to flip what you said too, because sometimes we are the opposite. Because after all, this is a she
Yeah.
chose joy, right? Because we do get to choose. And sometimes somebody out there is the angriest, happiest person. They're so busy being angry that they've forgotten to be happy. Like happy is tucked away in
Right.
there. Um,
Right.
and well, I'm going to say joy, because joy is more internal than happiness, and that we don't even give ourselves permission to experience joy, because we would have to let go of the other stuff, like release it in order for us to reach our joy.
Absolutely.
you know so some people are just grumpy all the time,
They,
and you don't have
that's
to be. You actually are choosing to
exactly.
be. And I'm okay with who wants to give me some pushback on that. I stand by that.
Well, I stand with you. Because I think often people believe that they are victims of their emotions, right? The saying, oh, you
hmm
woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Well, you can choose to go to the other side of the bed and wake up on the other
Yep.
side. So and you don't have to allow one thing to derail your entire day. You can
Mm-mm.
acknowledge how you're feeling. You can
Mhm.
process it and put it in its proper place. Sometimes I have to just say,
Mhm.
you know what, because if something happens at work and I have to get things done, right? So sometimes I just acknowledge,
Mhm.
okay, I'm really frustrated right now, but I gotta table
Mhm.
this. I'm gonna deal with it later because I have to keep my eye on the project ahead of me. So there are times when I do
Mhm.
that, and then I go back to it. I don't just forget about it. I go back and unpack it, um, and figure out, well, what are next steps. Do I need to talk to someone about it,
Mhm.
or is it something that it's just not that important? Frustrated in the
Mhm.
moment, but it really isn't important. So I think that, yeah, I think that it's just, it's important to acknowledge it. And then, as I said, there are times when I have to put it to the side because I have to get something done.
Mhm.
Right, but I leave it alone.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's something Christine Hassler refers to it as kind of making a date with your
Mhm.
emotions. So it's like, I acknowledge your presence, and when I leave work today, this evening, we're gonna have a conversation with each other. We're gonna spend some time together and work through this, right? So we don't do an emotional bypass. We just may place them to the side for a moment to get through that
Right.
moment, right? And then we still deal with them, versus suppressing them, ignoring them, acting like they don't, denying the fact that they actually
Absolutely.
exist. So this has been good. And before you go, can you tell us a little bit about your nonprofit for brown and black
Oh,
girls?
certainly. So, yes, I am the president and CEO of Crittenden Services of Greater Washington, and we are in the Washington metropolitan area, where we serve 600 Black and brown girls, and they range from 6th through 12th grade. And we have a social emotional learning program. So, talk about, how do you deal with those emotions? How do you deal with your anger? So we go through all of that with our young ladies, but we also practice positive youth development, and we're trauma informed care program as well. We meet with with our young ladies
Mm.
weekly with the same well-trained group leader. And it's for the entire school year. So those groups really build up. I call it a sacred sister circle. And these young
Mm-hmm.
ladies will unpack a lot of things that they are experiencing and going through, and stressors, etc., in a very safe, supportive environment. And they know that their program leader can be counted on to provide factual information in a non-judgmental way.
Love
So what
it.
comes out of those groups is really extremely powerful. I had one of our alumni share with us that she said, or alumna, pardon me, share with us that she said, I may not have liked everybody in my group, but I loved each and every person in my group.
Mm.
So that supportive sisterhood that we all need,
Yes.
they are learning at
Mm.
such a young age on how to develop that and nurture that support.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So my gratitude to you and the work you do, and I'm going to follow up with you too to see, what I can do to support it
Oh, thank you.
in whatever way I can as well. And another question I always ask, what are you grateful for in this moment? And I ask that because I believe gratitude and joy are partners. And so, what are you most grateful for in this moment?
I am most grateful for in this moment is the opportunity to commune with you and share on a topic that I feel so passionate about, and that I know
Mhm,
a lot of people struggle with unforgiveness. So I am just grateful for this
mhm,
opportunity to be able to share with your listeners my journey and the steps it takes for healing and true forgiveness. So thank you for providing this opportunity.
mhm. Thank you for sharing. And so, where can people stay connected? How can they stay connected
Oh,
to you?
certainly. So please stay connected to me via social media. Siobhan Howard Davenport on Facebook, and my handle on Twitter is at Siobhan D Author, and I am getting started with Instagram. But if you connect with me on the others, you can. I would love to stay connected. Absolutely.
Yeah, the sound went out for a moment. We lost audio for a moment. So if you could
Oh,
repeat what you just said about Instagram.
oh, certainly. I was saying that I am becoming introduced to Instagram. So I will be on. I think I have an account just because I have Facebook, but I am not active on Instagram. But I'm changing that.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh,
Instagram's kind of cool. Yeah. So, well, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for being who you are and all the goodness and the work that you do. And I am deeply honored and grateful that we are connected.
oh, certainly I am as well. And thank you for what you are doing and putting out so much joy into the world.
Mm, yes. And so for the listeners out there, wasn't this good? I feel like Oprah when she says that was good, right? Yeah, like that was good. So I would love to hear your feedback. Let me know what your takeaways were. And by all means, let Siobhan know what your takeaways were. Let us know how it served you. And I'm challenging you to go out and explore, really take a deep dive into the areas, the spaces in your life where there is some leftover residue that's tied to unforgiveness. Because your freedom lies in your decision to say yes to who you are, yes to what you want, and yes to what you stand for. So will you stand for standing in your freedom today? And on that note, we say so long, and I'll see you on the next episode.